Al Hanisim, Vala Purkon, Vala Gvuros, Vala Chus, Vala Milchamos. We're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the tremendous, miraculous victory, which is at the heart of the Hanukkah story, and that is the beauty and the light of Hanukkah, which is upon us at the moment. I'd like to just have a closer look at it through the eyes of some of the Rishonim and Achronim and see something very fascinating here. Who was the enemy? It says, K'sha'omdo Malchus Yavon HaRasho Al Amcha Yisrael, the Greek empire set itself up to persecute and to be intolerant of the Jewish people. But what did it want? It didn't want to destroy them. The Greeks didn't hate the Jews at all. This wasn't anti-Semitism as we know it from other sources. This was a particular type of enemy. Their goal was lahashkichom terosecha or lahavirom mechuki ritzanecha. All they were interested in was to stop the Jewish people practicing Torah and mitzvahs. and the Hashmonaim decided that a battle was called for in order to restore Torah and mitzvahs to Eretz Yisrael. And that itself is something, it was a great achievement. What's interesting though is I want to have a look at this through the eyes of the Rambam just for a minute, because the Rambam, he lists the great achievements of the Hashmonaim. That they were, after the victory over the Greeks, wasn't strictly speaking the Greeks, it was the Seleucid empire of the Syrian Greeks, who were dominant at the time under Antiochus Epiphanes, and they were persecuting any sign of Jewish practice. Upon him, when the Rambam lists this wonderful achievement, he then adds on something else, something which the Alanissim doesn't mention. He says, "V'he'emidu melech min haKohanim." They didn't only have the courage to win the military victory, they also had a different sort of courage, which was political courage, to establish a Jewish monarchy, to establish what came to be known later on as the Hasmonean dynasty, the Malchei Hashmonaim. Right? And this was done, says the Ramban, v'chozra malchus liyisrael. And this is an amazing phrase in the Rambam. The Rambam says that one of the great achievements was political, that sovereignty, Jewish sovereignty, returned to Eretz HaKodesh. And this is a very fascinating thought, particularly in modern times, where declaring Jewish sovereignty over the whole of Israel is a complex subject. But here we're talking about the sovereignty that was established 2,200 years ago by the Hashmonaim. It's particularly interesting to see the Rambam highlighting this against the contrast with the writings of the Ramban. The Ramban, a century after the Rambam, actually makes a big issue out of this and says that even though the Hashmonaim were themselves Chasidei Elyon, that's his language, of the Ramban writing in Parshas Vayechi on the Pasuk Lo Yosor Shevet Yehuda, there he says they were Chasidei Elyon. They were great spiritual leaders. And without them, who knows, Torah itself could have been lost from the land of Israel completely. Nevertheless, he says, the Ramban, they did a big Aveira. What was their Aveira? Their Aveira was establishing Malchus from the Kohanim. Because this was in some way, says the Ramban, a violation of the tzivui of the Zayda, of Yaakov Avinu, that he says, La Yosor Shevet mi Yehuda, I'm giving Malchus to Yehuda, and from now on, Malchus La Yosor Shevet mi Yehuda, it should never leave Yehuda. Right? And therefore, by the Kohanim taking the mantle of the kingdom on themselves, they were violating that, and because of that, they suffered a terrible, whatever, they were all killed in battle, says the Ramban, a terrible thing. But you can see clearly, I believe, that the Rambam didn't agree with that, because the Rambam in one line says, "V'hemidu melech min haKohanim, v'chazra malchus liyisrael." That it's true they established a king from the Kohanim, but they re-established Jewish sovereignty, and that was an overwhelming achievement, which transformed the whole country. I'd like to just have a look at, for a moment, at maybe a little bit of the counsel for the defense for the Hashmonaim. Why indeed did they take the Malchus for themselves? If they would have been simply egoistic and power maniacs and they took it for themselves, there wouldn't be any questions. But if the Ramban is right that they were Hasidei Elyon, they were great tzaddikim, and they knew about the halacha of La Yosor Shevet mi Yehuda, that the Malchus was for Yehuda, why did they take it for themselves? So I'd just like to suggest to you two different reasons, both of which I find fascinating. One of them is in the writings of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in Emes Yaakov, where he says that they kept the Malchus away from Yehuda for a very important reason. And the background to this reason is that, of course, the Bayis Sheni, the Second Temple period, was an extremely important period for Klal Yisrael. This was a time which gave a tremendous amount of power and strength to the Jewish people, a time during which there was a lot of Torah learning and the Chachomim that was developed, the Chochmah, which later on became the Mishnah, that was developed during the Bayis Sheni period, and all the Takonos Chachomim of Ezra, Anshe Knesset Gedolah, all the mitzvahs to Rabbanon really came established through the Bayis Sheni period, so it was a very important time in developing Jewish life. But at the same time, there was a very interesting danger in a sense, because Yeshaya and Zechariah had all prophesied that the Jewish people will go back to the land of Israel, rebuild Yerushalayim, rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, and that's the Geula Acharona. That is the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people and of mankind. And here's an interesting thing. Ezra did lead the Jewish people back into, Ezra and Nehemiah brought them back into Eretz Yisrael. They did rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. They got the Karbonos going and everything, and there was once again a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. Why did nobody say, wow, it's Mashiach time? Why did nobody say that? Says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, well, it's not a question, because so long as we were under foreign rule, everybody understood that we were in some way, we had to submit to the Persian or the Greek Empire, and therefore clearly this is not a Geula. But he says there was this massive danger, and that is that if they took somebody from Yehuda and put him on the throne and said, look, this is a Melech who is Ben David, then there was a danger of Mashiach Sheker. There was a danger that Klal Yisrael would think, this is it. This is the Geula Acharona. And this is one of the most, as we all know in Jewish history, one of the most confusing things in Jewish history were periods in which there was a Mashiach Sheker, there was a false image of the redemption which swept through the Jewish people. Without going into details, that is a massive danger. To avoid that danger, says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, they decided they had to establish a Malchus, but they couldn't do it they couldn't take somebody from Yehuda. So they took somebody from their own ranks and they established the Malchus. This is in short, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky's thesis, which I find very, very fascinating. He says there were several things which were done in order to emphasize that even though in Bayis Sheni they were back in Israel and they'd actually rebuilt Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, it wasn't yet Yerushalayim HaBenuya in the full sense of the word. One of the other things he mentioned is they maintained the names of the months, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av, which were essentially names with Persian origins, which were Goyish names, January, February, March, April, May. They were names which came from non-Jewish sources, even non-Jewish pagan sources, and they kept them in order to emphasize that, yes, we're back at Eretz Yisrael, we're back, we're thrilled to be reconnected to the Eretz HaKodesh, and Yerushalayim, and Hebron, and Tzfat, and everything, but we're still in Golus. It's not yet the Geula Acharona. These were the Simonim. So one of the Simonim, says Rabbi Kamenetsky, had to be not to have a king who wasn't Mizera David. This is a very fascinating, quite a broad theme concept from the writings of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, which has some contemporary relevance as well. I'd like to add Tzadok HaKohen, writing about the same subject, in which he says it is true that the Kohanim were not meant to be kings. They were not meant to take on the Melucha. But he says this is only 99% true, because obviously the Malchus throughout Jewish history always went through the paternal side. It went from father to son, not from mother to son or from mother to daughter. But, he says, who did Aaron HaKohen marry? Aaron HaKohen, the Pasuk says that Aaron married Elisheva Bas Aminadab Achos Nachshon. So Aaron had married the daughter of Nachshon ben Aminadab. Nachshon ben Aminadab was the Nasi of Yehuda. Right, we're reading now about all the Nasiim and their Karbanos. So the Nasi of Yehuda, Nachshon ben Aminadab, his sister was the princess of Yehuda, and she carried within her some of the genetic material, so to speak, of Yehuda and of Malchus. She married Aaron HaKohen. Once that happened, said Tzadok HaKohen, it was inevitable that at some stage along the way, this Malchus, which had been brought in by Elisheva, should surface in the real world, and that's when it surfaced. It surfaced in the time of the Hashmonaim, and they took the Malchus, B'tzedek. They were justified in doing so because of the Yerusha, so to speak, of Elisheva and Achos Nachshon. And it's not by chance, I think, I'd just like to add to Rav Tzadok, I don't think he mentions this, it's not by chance that actually of all the Hasmonean kings, most of them actually went off the derech in terms of Yiddishkeit. They deviated into a Hellenistic world and into the world of the Tzedukim and the Baitusim, but there was one of them that was the greatest tzaddik, or tzaddikis in that case, was the one and only time in Jewish history where we had a Jewish queen, and that was Shlomzion HaMalka. So Shlomzion HaMalka, in some sense, is, in inverted commas, of course, a reincarnation, so to speak, of Elisheva Achos Nachshon. She represented the Malchus which was contained within the Kahuna. And this is, I think, a very fascinating idea, which is suitably from Rav Tzadok HaKohen, one of a great genius of Hasidic and Kabbalistic thought. Bottom line is, we're given a Yontef which contains within it the power of the Kahuna, the power of the Malchus, and the significance of restoring sovereignty to the land of Israel. The Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael is transformed by having Jewish sovereignty, and that takes a lot of courage to do it, but in fact, it's a cause of celebration, and it's a cause for us to have a Hanukkah Sameach, or as the Hasidim say, a lichtige Hanukkah. A Hanukkah full of light, full of inspiration, and giving strength to Klal Yisrael through difficult times to be able to assert the Jewish presence and the Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, v'chein yiratzon.